Good afternoon. Thanks for having me. Thanks for coming out. Unlike my colleagues, do not have a PowerPoint. In fact, I think PowerPoint is unconstitutional. Among the very many things that are going on. But I kind of feel like we're coming to the end of The Empire Strikes Back. You know, it's always darkest before the dawn, well, or until it gets pitch black, I suppose. But I like to think of myself as an optimist. The Constitution is in the news now, in public discourse, unlike it's been in decades. That's, of course, good for those of us who make our living talking about the Constitution and current affairs. But I think it's a healthy development for the Republic as a whole, because people aren't just saying, I disagree with that policy, or let's talk about the economic costs and benefits of something that the President or Congress proposes. They say, where does the government have the power to do that? And that's an eminently healthy response, and it's one that I think all members of Congress and all citizens need to remember and go back to. Certainly this Congress, at least the House, took a small, mostly symbolic, but also important step with these constitutional authority statements. If these things that were put in at the beginning of last year even gave one member pause over one piece of legislation that he or she was going to introduce because they didn't know where in the Constitution he or she had the power to do that, then it's worth the implementation. We've come a long way since, when you remember, Nancy Pelosi was asked where the government had the power to require people to buy health insurance, and she said, "Are you serious?" Because, of course, the Constitution is the last refuge of the scoundrel that has no good policy arguments to make. And indeed, Obamacare, as we've seen, has not gone away. I can't claim to have read it all. I believe Mike Tanner is the only person in the entire country to have read it, and I think he told me once, he might have had a drink or two, that he only skimmed the Indian law parts of it. But anyhow, we have now collectively read it, and we've now collectively more or less understood it. And it makes even less economic sense, and disturbingly, it is even more unconstitutional than we feared. The cases before the Supreme Court that are going to be argued at the end of March and decided by the end of June are only the tip of the iceberg. Obviously, the individual mandate is the biggest problem, and it is the linchpin that holds the whole thing together. I mean, sure, you could have a freestanding tax on indoor tanning services, the Snooki tax, and reform waste and fraud accounting provisions with Medicare, all these different things. You could put those in, but that wasn't the purpose of the legislation. The purpose of the legislation was to fundamentally reform health care as we know it. To paraphrase Joe Biden, it was a big deal, right? And that mandate is unprecedented, not in the sense of reforming health care, but in the sense of the government, not even in the depths of the New Deal or the Great Society or the Civil War, has ever required people to buy something. I mean, this is just, if the government can do this, then there are no principled limits on federal power. And we'll see what the government's lawyers have to say at the Supreme Court, but so far the best they've been able to come up with is healthcare is unique, and listing a lot of different economic facts for how it's unique. I mean, that's good as a matter of policy. We can have that policy discussion, but as a matter of constitutional law, that's just not good enough. It doesn't. The next time that Congress wants to bail out the auto or financial or some other industry, they'll say, well, this new reform scheme only works if we require people to buy something or do something else that otherwise we would think of as being unconstitutional. There's also the Medicaid coercion issue. The federal government is requiring states to transform their Medicaid, their health care bureaucracies, not at the cost of additional funds that Obamacare is providing, but at the cost of all Medicaid funds. The states are quite literally between a rock and a hard place. This is coercive. If it's not a coercive use of the government's spending powers and strings attached to its spending, I'm not sure what is. There are lots of other things. What's been derided as the death panel, right? The Independent Payment Advisory Board. There's actually something to that. You have unelected, unaccountable, freestanding new bureaucracy that it's going to decide which procedures are going to be worth paying for, and therefore for the person who can't otherwise afford them to get. There's waivers, arbitrary waivers, surprise, surprise, gourmet restaurants and a whole host of other businesses in Nancy Pelosi's San Francisco district have gotten waivers from Obamacare. Also the whole state of Nevada, but who is the senator from there. But states like Indiana and Louisiana have been denied. A whole host of problems. But again, Obamacare is like a constitutional seminar, and I know I'm running out of time. There's a whole host of economic liberty, rule of law issues, from the Chrysler bailout and the bailout of banks. Just today, a settlement was announced with the lawsuits with how foreclosures and mortgage write-downs work. Apparently, there might be an executive order, we'll watch tonight, requiring banks simply to write down their bad mortgages. It's a subversion of creditors' rights. Dodd-Frank, if you like Sarbanes-Oxley, which cost the economy so much more than it saved in preventing accounting abuses, Dodd-Frank, not only does it have those economic costs, but it has a whole host of separation of powers problems, creating these new agencies and bureaucracies that the Senate, the Congress can't even touch. They're their own legislators, judges, executioners, and juries. And of course, the Consumer Finance Protection Board, right? That is one of those agencies, and we can't even get its leadership in a constitutional manner. These recess appointments when there's no research. On the energy front, Keystone XL, right? I'm not going to argue the environmental economics or weighing environmental versus jobs. That's my colleagues who handle that area. But look, on the face of the law, the president was not allowed to delay implementation of the project for the reason that he gave, which is that there needs to be more environmental impact studies. By the last law addressing this during the compromise over the debt ceiling, Congress put in a law and the president signed that would not be a reason, and yet here he is shutting down that problem. Deepwater Horizon, the drilling ban, a federal judge cited the government in contempt for implementing its moratorium on drilling for no good reason. I'm paraphrasing, but the legalese is so striking and strong. The government was cited for contempt by that court. Oh, we think, okay, well, Democrats are in power, so civil liberties at least are doing well. We can, we might not like these other things. Well, I mean, the drug war has only intensified. The marijuana arrests are up. Fast and Furious, right? Giving guns to drug lords. I mean, I don't know what the theory was, but obviously we wouldn't have that whole imbroglio without the drug war in the first place. And now, well, Gabby Giffords has announced she's resigning. I would look for some aspect of a gun control message coming down tonight, regardless of what the Supreme Court has now said about the Second Amendment and the right to keep and bear arms. Religious liberty, immigration reform. When's the last time you heard the president talk about immigration reform, right? The great savior of minorities and immigrants and the poor. Or how about just yesterday, the Supreme Court unanimously ruled against the government's position in how the police can surveil people by attaching GPS tracking devices to their cars for a month, 24 hours a day, seeing everywhere they can go without a warrant. And the government conceded that they didn't have a warrant. It was just whether they could do it in the first place. That great left-wing ACLU card-carrying member, Antonin Scalia, for the majority, said that this is ridiculous. I mean, under a very, even under basic concepts of the government trespassing on the car. That great civil libertarian Sam Alito, right? The alternative view presented was that no, it's just reasonable expectations of privacy that were violated, not the search of the car. So we have that debate about exactly to what extent and how the government was violating our civil liberties. Look, all roads lead to the Constitution. We got to fight these cases. We got to look at this legislation. Those of you that are working for members of Congress, make constitutional points of order and talk about this to your constituents, because people understand this. And ultimately, the First Amendment is there to check these abuses of government power. And like I said, I'm optimistic. I think we can turn this around. We'll see what the court rules on Obamacare, on a whole host of big issues that are before the court this year. But look, the Constitution is in play. The law matters. It's not just a matter of with due respect to Dan and Mike, dollars and cents. That obviously matters. But if we get rid of the stuff that's illegal and unconstitutional, a lot of that bad dollars and cents goes away by itself. Thank you.